All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so happy that you all could be here. We're really excited about the webinar we have presented for you today. It's going to be something a little bit different. My name is Justin Settles. I am the project specialist for the Identification and Recruitment Consortium. And here with me is Emily Williams from South Carolina. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm going to be weird and be really close to my laptop because I hear sometimes my sound isn't good if I'm not. So I'm Emily, like Justin said. And yeah, we're really excited. This kind of was born out of just almost joke that we've had before about how much fun it would be to share, with other recruiters, kind of some of these stories that I know we all have up our sleeves. And Justin had the great idea to kind of make it more into a more formal training. So we're super excited about it. But I'm from South Carolina and I'm the ID&R and services coordinator, but I also do some recruiting to kind of keep in touch with what's going on out there.
Yep. So today's webinar is called Never Have I Ever, Learning from ID&R Experiences in the Field. For those that have never heard of it before, Never Have I Ever is a game often played by friends to get to know one another and the experiences they've had. It's a great game to get together, to be able to share stories with one another. And one of the things that we've heard, we as recruiters always learn best from each other, learning from the experience of others, seeing how others work. And one of the things that, we've heard that people have been missing during the pandemic is having that experience, to hear from other recruiters and to share their stories. So today we're going to be playing the game, Never Have I Ever, and we're going to use the game to talk about some of those common and unusual experiences that recruiters have had in the field and what we can learn from them. And so the way that this is going to work is that we're going to have, over the course of our presentation, 8 different scenarios. And so for each scenario, we're going to read a prompt that begins with Never Have I Ever, followed by something a recruiter or recruiters have experienced in the field. Each prompt is based on a true story from a recruiter. And so after the scenario, a poll is going to show up. For each prompt, there'll be a poll asking if you have ever experienced the scenario in question or something similar. And so you can answer yes or no, and we'll be able to see exactly, how many of you have had similar experiences. And then after the poll, we'll be sharing a little bit of the story behind the prompt, as well as what we have learned. If you have had, like I said, a similar experience, please feel free to share in the chat box as well. We'll be keeping an eye, your own story or what you learned from that experience, or how you faced that experience. And then we'll read off some of the things that you said in chat as well. That way we all have a chance to contribute and share some of what we have learned from the field. And so hopefully through sharing our stories and our experiences, we'll be able to be better prepared for the next time we encounter similar situations in the field. All right, so let's get on to scenario 1. Jessica, if you could put up the poll, please. All right, Emily.
So scenario 1, never have I ever been stuck in unexpected bad weather while out recruiting.
All right, so we'll give you all a minute to answer in the poll, and then we'll continue on.
Can you see the poll, Justin?
Yep, we can see the poll, and I can see the results as well.
Okay, perfect.
So far, we've had 120 of 182 people answer. So we'll just give it a few more seconds to allow those last few people to get in. All right, we've had almost 150 people answer the poll, and of those results, 90 or 100 of you all answered yes. You have been caught in bad weather while out recruiting, while 53% or 54 of you said no.
Well, I'm kind of shocked that 54% of you said no. Maybe y'all already know a lesson that it took me a little bit longer to learn.
Or maybe we just need to move because they live in really nice areas of the country.
Clearly, y'all got some nice weather. We'll be doing another poll. Where do y'all live? Are you hiring? So I was out recruiting and teaching an OSY class when suddenly a strong spring thunderstorm came through. Not long after that, I started getting alerts for flash flooding, hail warning, and hail warnings for the county I was in. I ended up staying at the camp while I waited for the storm to pass over and kept an eye on the weather to see when it was safe to venture back out. While I waited, I helped the guys prepare their lunches for the next day and got to know them all a little bit better. So this is actually something that really did happen to me. I was out in Colleton County. One of our recruiters, Kate, from that area. I was at a center camp. It was the first year I was a recruiter. I didn't really think too much about the weather. And so I'd gone out to their camp and it was like, it was flash flooding, there's pouring down rain. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to back out onto the highway in this. So I just hung around the camp, after the class was over and said, do y'all mind if I just hang around for a little bit? And of course they said no, they didn't mind at all. Oh, wow. Alexander Rodriguez at recruiting and a tornado went by. Where is Alex? That's interesting. So this happens. I know that probably some of you, if you've been around longer, you've probably all heard the famous story about Kenny Carmona from the New York program who accidentally found himself stuck in a blizzard with a broken window. So he had to go and try to tape up the window, and then he had the car running and it was really cold. He kept on filling up with gas because he went stopped at a little gas station or whatever, so he couldn't make it back home. So we know these things happen, but I'm interested to know about the tornado going by. Alexander, if you've got time, write a longer thing in the chat. So yeah, appropriately enough, we got a tornado here, right? So in some areas, oh wow, just 3 weeks ago, somebody drove through a blizzard. There you have it, right? So for some areas, you might want to be looking out for thunderstorms, tornadoes, snowstorms, flash floods, mudslides, fires, right? Since the program's in almost every state in the union. Snow squall. That sounds terrible. I don't even know what that means, being from the South, but snow squall sounds awful. So check the weather. This has a pretty easy solution. Just check on the weather before you go. Now, I don't want y'all going back and saying, Emily told us if the weather isn't perfect, that we can't go recruiting. No. This is not to say that the weather has to be perfect for you to go recruit. Just something to think about while planning. You might want to wear different shoes. Even if I know it's going to rain, I might wear waterproof hiking boots instead of a different kind of, maybe more just a sneaker or something that's going to get wet and you're just going to have wet feet all night, right? So just things to think about. You might want to think about, obviously, if there's a tornado warning, making sure that you know what to do. I don't even know what to do in a dust storm. I guess you just drive carefully and try to pull over in a safe place, kind of like you would with a lot of heavy rain. I'm interested to know. And Alexander, you're saying you were with other recruiters in the car, and so a tornado just whipped right by y'all. Oh my God, that sounds so scary. I wish there was a way for you to give us more. Yeah, y'all just stopped. Well, I'm glad y'all didn't get Wizard of Oz out of there with that tornado. That would have been a bummer. All right. Another thing you can do to protect yourself is just learning more about maybe defensive driving techniques and what to do, like in the case of deer or other wild animal crossings. Again, out in Colleton County, I think we've all had deer jump out in front of the car a bazillion different times in a bazillion different places. One of our recruiters, two of our recruiters actually were out in the Conway area of South Carolina, kind of north of Myrtle Beach, and they got hit by a deer. I have also been I've not only have hit a deer, I've also been hit by a deer. I had completely come to a stop because there were a bunch of deer and it was a really, really non-busy country road. And the deer ran into my car anyway, even though the car was at a complete stop. So there you have it. So that's another thing you can do is learning about some of these defensive driving techniques. Sometimes a tornado is going to pop up, deer is going to pop up. There might be a little bit of ice on the road. So just things to think about before you head out. If you do drive your own car, I know some states have folks driving their own cars. Sometimes you get a rental, maybe there's a company car. I know everybody's got different situations going on. But if you do drive your own car, make sure you stay up to date on the maintenance. I know it's really easy to let that kind of stuff slide. I've been guilty of letting stuff slide before. But if you stay up to date with it and put little reminders either on your car somewhere, that's why they got those little mileage stickers for the oil changes, for example, or even if you sit down and maybe put them into your phone or something like that. So, oh, that timing belt's going to go soon. Maybe I need to go ahead, take some of that mileage check money, and start squirreling it aside for some of this maintenance you need to do your car, right? So not only putting it towards the gas, but also putting a separate, I've got a colleague who just, not in South Carolina, but another state, and she has a credit card that's just for her car stuff. So she like just sends her mileage checks like to that kind of like card and account. And then from there, she draws for her like oil changes and gas and, wiper fluid blades and all that, so that it's like easy to tell which money's going where, which I thought was actually a really good idea. You might even consider like AAA or some sort of other roadside assistance service, just because they might be able to, come get you out of a ditch or come bring you in a new car, get you towed, whatever. It doesn't take many times getting towed for all of a sudden one of those roadside assistance services become necessary. Again, if you have a separate account, that might be a good place again to draw that yearly fee out of. If you do get a rental through your work, which some of us do, just make sure you know how to get in touch with their roadside assistance. Especially if you do get in an accident or something kind of a little scarier happens in the moment, you might kind of feel a little bit panicked and not able to think clearly, whereas you've got everything right there in front of you where you need it. You kind of stay organized ahead of time. If you've got some sort of accident report they're going to have to fill out, having all of that ready for you ahead of time will make any incident that comes your way maybe a little less stressful. And then another thing that you consider doing is having a trusted family, friend, or colleague with whom you share your location. So you might say like, hey, I'm going to be, driving all around Aiken County tonight or whatever. And so you might tell one of your colleagues, I'm going to share my location with you until like the end of the night. Maybe you already have friends or family that you share your location with on your phone. Again, so that way, if somebody hadn't heard from you in a minute, or just so you feel safer, maybe knowing that like, hey, somebody knows where I was last or that I'm going to be out tonight. They can kind of keep vague tabs on me in case something comes up and there's an emergency and I need somebody to know where I am. Maybe your battery dies, that sort of thing. Kate is saying Life 360 is a free app to share your location with family and friends. Yeah, so for example, maybe you could download that. And I don't think I missed anybody else's stuff in the chat. Oh, Jessica, you had a warning. Do you want to like unmute and share? You're good. Warning on your phone, the tornado was in the direct vicinity when you were doing re-interviews in Georgia. You had nowhere to go, so you just looked at the sky to see the clearest area and drove to that direction. Did you actually see did you see the tornado, or you just like drove to the clear area?
No, they just had really bad storms the entire week that I was down there, and it was everywhere. And so it was one of those things where sometimes you literally don't know where to go. You don't know the area. You don't know the place that you're at. And the only thing I could logically think was, okay, the sky is clear, at least clearer that direction, and everything else was gray and nasty. So logically, that's what I did, and it worked, but it probably might not have been the smartest thing to do.
Thanks for sharing about that.
Let's on to scenario 2. And so our next poll is going to be up on the screen. And so never have I ever been offered food while recruiting. Let me give you all a minute to check it out, to answer the poll, and then we'll get talking. All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds. Looks like we had 175 out of 220 people answer. All right, and so with 177 people answering, 139 of you said yes, you have been offered food while recruiting, while only 38 of you had said no. And so as we could see, getting offered food is a very, very common thing when we're out recruiting. And, we have to know how to respond in those situations. And it's really important, especially to know the cultural differences and boundaries that might exist in those situations so that we're careful not to offend anybody. I know for me, one time during the summer, I was visiting a family that was out working on a tomato farm. And I saw a lot of answers in chat about giving offered produce or onions or things that people were growing. And to thank me for enrolling this family, the family offered me a box of tomatoes to take home. I don't normally eat tomatoes, especially to have a whole box of tomatoes, but I was worried about offending the family by saying no. And so they took the tomatoes home, put them under the seat of my truck, but then I instantly forgot about them. And so they ended up being there all summer, to the point that then my truck started to smell because the tomatoes went bad under my seat. But it's all because I didn't know how to handle that situation in order to, accept the family, or to take what they were offering, or how to say no in a way that wouldn't offend them. When we're out recruiting, cultural competency is critical to really help us identify new students and to maintain those impactful relationships. We have to know the possibilities of, or we have to know the populations that we are working with. We have to know where they're coming from, their backgrounds, because they can really help us to build that rapport, to establish those relationships, and to build trust with families. It's important that we, as recruiters, recognize that not all migrant students come from the same background. Migrant students come from a lot of different types of families. They come from a lot of different places. The migrant population in this country is very diverse. And so it's important for us to be able to recognize and celebrate that diversity. We shouldn't make any assumptions about, who a migrant student can be or where migrant families might be coming from. And having that cultural competency can really help families feel more at ease talking to you, as well as make them feel more confident and willing to sign up for the migrant education program. So when we're out there recruiting, we should always, be self-aware of our own potential cultural biases. It's something that I think I've seen a lot with recruiters, where, we might just assume because of our own cultural backgrounds that something's okay, when that might not always be the truth. We have to be able to be self-aware, to be self-reflective as well. And that's going to help us to identify, our areas of growth, or where we might be able to be better, or where we might be able to learn. When you're out there, you should always be willing to learn, always ask questions, especially if they're families that are trusted in the program, that have been there a while, that you have a good relationship with. It's a great opportunity for you to get to know and learn more, especially, we're seeing students coming in from a lot more diverse places. I know I've talked to several states that have had Haitian students for the first time ever. Maria in chat says they're starting to see more families from Nicaragua and El Salvador. And so you can see, as people are starting to come in from places that you don't necessarily have experience with, it's important to ask those questions. It's important to learn. And it's important really to know as best as you can the communities that you're serving, to take the time to actually do the research, to get to know them, get to know the cultures that they are coming from. And it's going to help make you better recruiters, and it's going to help you know how to handle those situations. Sometimes if a family offers you food, it can be offensive to say no. And so getting to know that culture, to know what that's like, will help you in those situations so that you can make sure that you get to eat something delicious, but that you're also, not upsetting any of the families that you work with. Awesome. Now on to scenario 3.
And we promise we're not trying to trap y'all with this one, but never have I ever made a mistake when determining a student's eligibility. This poll is anonymous, so your ID&R coordinators and directors won't see this, but yeah, never have I ever made a mistake determining.
All right, we'll give the poll a few more seconds. We've got almost 75% of y'all have answered. All right, and with 75% answered, it looks like 127 of you said that yes, you have made a mistake when in determining a student's eligibility, while 41% for 41 of you said no, you haven't. So as you can see, it's common for us as recruiters, to accidentally make mistakes out there.
Yeah, very interesting. I saw, Raquel, you were saying something about the mistake, maybe not so much with eligibility, but not asking enough probing questions when you're still new. And sometimes that can still be a challenge to know what to ask. And I think that's a really good point. So a family arrived at my recruiting area about 2 years ago. Both parents have been working at the dairy farm since they moved here from Guatemala. Although milking cows and other work around a dairy farm is agricultural, and they had made a qualifying move, I forgot to establish if it was temporary. I later realized after my supervisor rejected the COE that they were not going to qualify. I was really embarrassed about the mistake and even more to call them. Good for you, the whatever percent of you who've never made a mistake before, but unfortunately this was me. In South Carolina, we have a lot of agriculture, we have a lot of seasonal agricultural as opposed to temporary. We really don't have that much temporary. And so I was a new recruiter. I hadn't really thought too much about it, about the whole having to get that temporary statement from them. And so I found this family. They're like, yeah, we just got here a couple of years ago. Okay, great. They're milking cows on this farm, bing, bang, boom, check, check, check. And so I went to turn in the COE, didn't have that temporary statement. And then when I went back and talked to the family, I realized, the whole oh no, yeah, we got here, we've been working here, no breaks, whatever. And so unfortunately, since they had been working there that whole time, I had to let them know, I'm sorry, I was wrong when I told you that your kids qualify for the program. And it was embarrassing, but it happens. And there was really no other recourse other than to have to call them and let them know that I'd made somebody else did the same thing. Right? Mistakes happen. That was me in the picture. So first step is to show yourself some self-compassion. Seems like some of us on here might be perfect, but find that hard to believe. Everybody makes mistakes, especially when you're new, or even if you've been around for a long time. You misheard, maybe you accidentally qualified a kid who you forgot to ask, maybe the kid's 2.5 and their QAD was from 3 years ago or something, you forgot to see if they were a BAM, right? So just give yourself a break, show yourself some self-compassion. What you can do to prevent any mistakes is you can regularly take the quizzes and trainings on different ID&R scenarios to try to stay sharp. For example, the IDRC has a ton of resources, y'all. It's absurd when you really start digging into it. So many resources on how to accomplish that. So if you want to do a little bit of self-study, you can go back on their YouTube page and watch a lot of trainings. You can go through some of the scenarios, the quizzes online, the different modules. There's so much. You can also ask your ID&R coordinator or your state director or whoever it is at your organization who'd be in charge of helping to train you on that to help you better understand, or maybe to give you some techniques. It took me a little while to learn, and I don't have to practice it real often, so I'm still not super sharp at it, how to ask those temporary questions in a way that kind of gets you to it helps you to ask the question in the right way so you don't just end up confusing the family more. And the most important thing that we can do in a mistake about determining eligibility, but as well about any mistake, is just to learn from those mistakes. Obviously, if you see yourself having a pattern of consistently forgetting to ask about BAM kids, accidentally signing up kids who've already graduated high school, who are still age eligible, but are, high school, whatever, if you start to see a pattern, or your supervisor, whoever it is, teammates notice a pattern in you, also to have a little bit of the humility to accept that and say, all right, I've really been making a lot of mistakes on this. How can I improve? And not trying to cover up and be like, oh God, I made a mistake. Nobody can know. It's much better just to admit you made the mistake and take the necessary steps to correct it than it is to try to hide it or cover it up. That's never good with federal dollars. Never want to be hiding things or covering things up.
Can I make a quick comment? I was just thinking, sometimes we may not even realize that we made an error because I think that's one of the fallacies sometimes we think in MEP, that we can always have it right. One of my first experiences with the re-interview was I had signed up a family and my boss was checking on the work that I had done. And I was 100% sure the family qualified. I talked to the mom. She said that they lived out in West Tennessee and her husband worked in a nursery. And I knew of the nursery. She told me where. I signed them up. End of story. And then we have this re-interview. And so my state director says, hey, I don't know why you signed this family up. Dad says he's a mechanic and he's always been a mechanic. And he came to specifically, well, I talked to mom. Mom was under the impression that dad worked at the nursery. She didn't even really, it was not, our rules are not so prevalent in their mind. And so there is just going to be human error, that just whether it's us or whether it's the person we're talking to and the questions we ask. And so I was like super embarrassed, but when I could tell her, I said, look, I talked to the mom, you talk to the dad. Aha, we need to make sure that we're talking to the person that does the work if we can. And also realize that, maybe I needed to ask some more questions and not just assume that mom understood everything that her husband was doing. And so I think that there's mistakes that we realize we make, and there's mistakes that we realize later on with checks and balances. And that's why it's good that quality control exists, that we're like, oh, wow, I made a big mistake and was not even aware of it. So.
Yeah, thanks, no, for sharing that. That's such a good point. And thanks also in the chat for those of you who might have missed it. A BAM is born after the move. So like a kid who's maybe 2 years old or even 3, 4, whatever, they qualified technically for the program, but they were born after that move happened. So just real quick, if you do make a mistake, which inevitably it's going to happen for some reason or another, just make sure you follow your state's directions for correcting an eligibility determination. And then call the family to explain that you made a mistake and you're sorry for the confusion as soon as is appropriate. So like if this is a sudden realization at 1 a.m., like, oh my gosh, I think that family actually doesn't qualify and I already submitted the COE, whatever. Don't call them at 1 a.m. unless you know that that's like a normal time for them to be awake, right? Call them at an appropriate time, but just reach back out and let them know. And then you want to just encourage the family to stay in touch in case something changes and maybe they qualify in the future, like maybe they don't qualify now, but they might move somewhere else around your state. Maybe they shared something with you well, we plan on, maybe you accidentally signed somebody up who actually wasn't migratory and they are a seasonal worker, but they don't move. They had shared with you they plan on moving either to some other state or some other part of your state in the future. And then also consider if you did the interview and you're not sure, I think a couple people said that in the chat, bringing in other either more experienced colleagues or supervisor to help you re-interview them again, like Jessica was saying, maybe one of you talked to mom, one of you talked to dad, sort of like that, just to kind of be like, okay, let's just make sure we've covered all of our bases. We didn't, forget to ask, like Kate and I were out the other week, again, Colleton, man, interviewing this family, and I asked the mom in every different way I could think of about whether or not she moved here, moved there. Did she ever move for work? She's like, nope, we've been here for 15 years, blah, blah, blah. And Kate asked it, I swear, in the same way. But then mom was like, yep, well, earlier we were in North Carolina and then we went down to Charleston to plant and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, okay, yeah, great. So sometimes just having a colleague come back with you, or you can't have that maybe happen for every single interview, but if there's one that you're like, I feel like I'm just missing something here, try to pull in some other help.
All right, so now on to scenario 4. So the poll is up for everybody. And so never have I ever been unsure if a student should qualify and not know what to do next. We'll give it a few more seconds here. All right, so with 74% responding, 122 of you said that yes, you have had moments where you were unsure if a student should qualify and you didn't know what to do. And 46% of you said no. I think for a lot of us, when we're out recruiting, it can be common for us to run into situations where we're not entirely sure, whether a student qualifies or not. And we have to work through the process of determining that eligibility and might have to ask for help from somewhere else. I know for me, one time I found a group of workers who had moved to the area to trim trees for the city. I knew that logging of trees and forestry was considered agricultural work, but I didn't know if the work that these workers specifically were performing would fall under those categories. I tried asking another recruiter, but they also didn't have any experience in that area. And so they were just as confused as I was. And so sometimes when we're out there, we can run into these situations. And even if we reach out to help, it can be difficult. So what do we do then? To begin with, just know that it is normal. You will encounter situations in the field where you are unsure if a student should be eligible or not. It's important to make sure that we are as familiar as possible with the non-regulatory guidance in order to help prepare ourselves for this situation. We can make sure that we're reading over and over the regulatory guidance. We read it regularly. I always encourage recruiters to make sure to read through the section, especially on eligibility, at least once every 2 months. That way it's, fresh on your mind. It never hurts to read over it again. And we should never be afraid to ask questions to other recruiters or to supervisors, especially when it comes to qualifying work that we might be unfamiliar with. States, as part of their quality control process, should already have a system in place for answering questions related to identification and recruitment. It's one of the requirements for quality control listed in the non-regulatory guidance by the Federal Office of Migrant Education. And so your state should already have a formal process for how to go about answering questions of ID&R. And it could just be as simple as you reaching out to your supervisor reaching out to someone at the state level who can then ask OME if need be. So if you are unsure of what your state's process is, you can always go to your supervisor to ask them. If you are unsure if any activity specifically qualifies, always ask the worker or the employer for more details about what it is that they are doing so you can better understand the job and its role in the agricultural process. We had somebody in chat mention that tree work can oftentimes be very confusing, and there's several different, with a lot of different agriculture activities, especially those that are kind of on the line of being towards the end of that initial processing stage or the production stage where things can get a little gray. And so if you are confused, if you ask questions to try to learn more, it can really help to kind of clarify things and make things seem clear for you. Once you get to know the specific acts that are being done. So for example, in my situation, about the workers with the trees, learning that they were out there cutting down trees for power lines, we were able to determine that, okay, that in fact does not qualify. But it's important to ask to get as much details as possible, because many times when people are employed in agricultural businesses, it's very possible that they might be performing one activity that does not qualify, but they could be doing other activities that might qualify. And so the more information that you have, the better you'll be able to make determinations and decisions. If after the initial interview, you are unsure still if the student should be eligible, you may complete a COE in order to get the family's information, but do not tell them that they are eligible. And that's a really important distinction. You can complete the COE to get their information written down, but do not turn that COE in and do not tell them that they are eligible until you are able to confirm it. Let them know that you will get back in touch with them and that you will reach back out to them to give them the final determination. If you are worried about not being able to contact them in the future, sometimes we run into families, their phone numbers might change, for example. Maybe they're living in a temporary housing situation. A lot of times we might find families, for example, that are staying at hotels for a few days before moving on to a more permanent housing location. So if you're worried about not being able to contact them in the future, arrange a time to get back with them so that they'll be expecting you so that you can talk to them. All right, now on to scenario 5.
So never have I ever, I'm real interested because I thought all these other ones y'all were going to be for sure yeses. So never have I ever unexpectedly had a family or student share a very traumatic experience.
All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds here.
Yeah, I'm already seeing in the chat sort of what I was expecting about, yeah, all the time, especially with children in holding centers. Yes, yes, yes.
So with 75% of people responding, 157 of you, which is 90% that answered, said that yes, you have had families share, some traumatic experiences with you, while only 10% or 17 said no.
Wow, that's like not surprising necessarily, but I'm just blown away given, some of these other ones have been a little closer to like 60-40, but that really just speaks to the nature of migrant ed, that's such an overwhelming percentage.
I think for me personally, it also speaks to why I wanted us to do this presentation, just because, again, this is one of those common things. The poll indicates how common it is when 90% of us had said this is something that's happened to us, but it's something that we don't talk about or really train ourselves on how to deal with these situations.
Yeah, I would love a training. I don't know, some sort of cross training from some different organizations on like what to do when that happens. So while filling out a COE, I was just trying to make small talk by asking the mom if she had family here, back home in Guatemala. She burst into tears and started telling me about how her parents were murdered during the Civil War in Guatemala in the early 90s. Before I knew it, I was listening while she cried into my shoulder. This is, again, something that did happen to me. And as all of you are sharing in the chat, it happens frequently, and maybe, it shows trust, right? But this does definitely happen where somebody will just, you think you're making small talk, you scheduled yourself, 20, 30 minutes to do this, go by their house, do this thing, and all of a sudden you're like, all right, 3 hours later and a whole box of Kleenex, So what are some things we can do about that? First, just try to take a deep breath and try to listen. If this is like something that's traumatic for you to listen to again, that might be, something else to think about, but just take a deep breath and try to listen. You do not need to, and honestly, for the most part, we're not probably trained to give concrete advice or counseling, help them unpack their trauma, right? Unless a handful of y'all happen to have that in your background, that sort of skill maybe that we've semi picked up on, just again, the listening part, but you really shouldn't try to wade too far into counseling or concrete advice without that. You never know, like somebody said in the chat, sometimes they just need somebody who's not part of their family to listen to them, who's sort of like a neutral third party, as it were. You just never know what families or students might be going through. If this impacts the rest of your schedule, maybe you are now running behind, or it was just such a heavy conversation and it lasted for so long that you're like, I was planning on going out and being real cheerful and teaching this English class at this camp, but I got to go home and cancel. That was just really heavy. That's okay. Again, like with the weather, balancing, if you constantly find yourself getting behind because of these traumatic stories that you're hearing, something that you might be talking with a supervisor about. But it's okay to go home if you need to. If you can, and I realize how hard this can be. It drives me bananas whenever I read stuff like this too, but follow up with the distressed person with whatever tools and resources are available to them. Unfortunately, as we all know, some of these may not be available due to rural area, language, economics, etc. And the important thing is that is not your fault, right? That's something that I always struggle with personally, and professionally, I guess, where if there is some sort of issue like this, I'm like, I want you to like have this, amazing cultured bilingual person who will do it for free and they'll come to you and whenever, and sometimes it's just not realistic. There aren't really any resources in their area. Maybe there's a little bit of a resource. It might not be a perfect fit, but at least giving them the opportunity to reach out to whatever resources you might have in the area. You also might want to ask coworkers or supervisors for support whenever you need it. So maybe like, I've had a bunch of parents disclose a lot of heavy stuff for me this week. I think I need to take like a mental health day tomorrow. I'm kind of struggling. What does our company offer as far as like mental health and our benefits package, if that's available to you? How do you deal with it, when families just unleash some of this stuff on you and you're like, wow, what do we even do with that? Sometimes even just knowing, like Justin was saying earlier, that other people are going through this can help make you feel better. Like, okay, I'm not the only one. Yes, this is overwhelming. What can we do? Yeah, Maria, your supervisor so ashamed about interviews that go longer than expected. That's so sweet. Yeah. I feel like I already said this, but just again, be extra sure to use your practices to help you find peace again. This could be a combination of seeking spiritual guidance from whatever source you practice, physical exercise, music, like lighting, like coming home and having a little bedtime ritual, your networks of friends and family, community, whatever it is that you reach out to, make sure that you're taking care of that part of your life. And if your job offers, as I mentioned earlier, mental health services, please find the time to use it. We all get busy. It's always easy to be like, next week, next time, I'm okay. But you really want to reach out to that as soon as possible. Even if you think you're feeling okay, that could be the perfect time to work on building your not okay toolkit, right? As opposed to when you're in the middle of crisis and trying to build it.
All right, on to scenario 6. Never have I ever encountered an angry farmer, an angry or aggressive farmer. All right, and we'll give it a couple more seconds here. All right, so this one's a little bit closer, kind of surprising as well. So with 176 of you answered, only 55% or 97 had said yes, you had, while 45% and 79 of you said you hadn't. And so, for those of us that are out recruiting in farms a lot, I think it's something fairly common that we run into. And so again, this is one in particular is kind of surprising. I know for me in particular, while I was out recruiting in rural Tennessee, I encountered a farmer who was working on his truck by a barn. I stopped to introduce myself and to try to explain the purpose of the migrant education program. But in this particular time, I know several of y'all mentioned in chat that sometimes saying the word migrant can cause issues. For this particular farmer, he was upset as soon as he heard that I worked, with education and with the local schools. And so as soon as I mentioned the word education, he got heated and started screaming at me. The farmer yelled that the local schools were awful, and then he was angry that his tax money was helping to pay for the education of others. And so he kept yelling until I left. In this particular instance, it comes to find out that the farmer's wife had been a teacher in the local school system for about 30 years and had recently been let go from her job. And so all of his anger wasn't really towards me. It was towards the fact that his wife had recently lost her job. But I think, that's a lesson that we can learn, because when we're out there in the field and we encounter people who are angry or responding in a negative way, we have to remember that we are very, very rarely the issue. We are rarely the problem. Most of the time when we encounter people who are angry, farmers who are angry, there's something much deeper going on. Just like with that farmer whose wife had lost a job, and so he was upset about that. Many times, especially when we're working with farmers, we have to realize that being a farmer is a very stressful job. Climate change has drastically affected how farms are able to produce. Oftentimes, farmers are struggling to find labor to get all the work done. And so when we're talking to farmers, oftentimes it's when they're at their busiest and at their most stressful. And so if they respond negatively, if they respond angry, remember that you are not the issue there. There's other things that are happening that are adding stress to their life that are provoking that response. Just like people in chat had mentioned, try to avoid problematic words while conducting the interview. And, if you find that a subject is getting upset, or if the interview is not going the way you would like it to, feel free to change the subject at any time and you can circle back around. People mentioned in chat how the word migrant can sometimes be problematic. And so make sure you have other ways of being able to describe the program. For example, you can call migrant education program Title I Part C. That's very commonly used around the country. You can let people know you work with the local school districts. Make sure that you always have some form of identification with you to prove who you are and who you work for. It can be an ID badge, a letter from the State Department of Education saying who you are, or, a letter from the local school district or superintendent giving you permission to be there. And then when you're going out to visit, especially when you're talking to farmers, people in the community, we've seen people in chat saying they've even encountered angry parents while out recruiting. It can happen, but again, it all kind of follows under the same thing. You were very, very rarely the issue. Before whoever you're going out to speak to, make sure you have an idea or concrete idea of what that person's needs might be so that you can offer up solutions and how the migrant education program can meet those needs. Know that at any point that you are free to leave any conversation at any time. I've talked to a lot of recruiters who have told me that they felt like they had to stick around even when somebody was getting angry, or even when the conversation was starting to turn a little bit abusive, when people are yelling at you, because they were afraid that they had to stick around in order to try to get the COE. But the reality is that, we don't deserve to be in any of those situations. If people are starting to yell at us, remain calm, know that you're free to leave. You can end the conversation at any time. Virginia in chat says, when encountering an angry farmer, we stay as professional as we can and not overreact to the situation. And that's one of the best advice that you can hear. Thank them for their time and just leave. Like I said, you can leave at any time. They may be yelling, but if you respond, it can only get worse. So again, know that you're free to leave. Always enter any interview, any conversation, any property or situation with an exit plan. Know exactly how and where you're going to leave. And then, if a conversation is starting to turn controversial or heated, you can just nod your head, give these minimal encouragers, is what they're called in communication theory, which is essentially just kind of nonverbal or like small verbal ticks that you can give to let people know that you are in fact listening, but not necessarily agreeing with what they're saying. And even something as like, nodding your head, making sure that you're standing upright to remain positive in your body language can go a long way to helping to kind of de-escalate that situation. And so as far as like angry parents go, again, I always recommend, that you have that identification to let them know who you work for. And if the parents continue to be angry, you can always work with the local schools to maybe help set up in a meeting that could be in a different place or different location that might make the situation a little bit calmer. You can always come back around or have, work with the local schools to have somebody reach out to them potentially that might be able to help kind of de-escalate the situation. All right, now we have two more scenarios here. So on to scenario 7.
Yeah. So never have I ever struggled to get an OSY or a student to enroll in the migrant education program. Never have I ever struggled to get an OSY or a student to enroll in the migrant education program. All the time, exactly, especially some of those OSY. Challenging. Yeah, exactly. So y'all in the chat have pointed out too, just while you're finishing the poll, 2 different kinds of OSY issues, right? Sometimes it's hard to get them to go because they're like OSY that are just here to work, you know, kind of like H2, H2B or some other kind of worker, and they're not interested. And then sometimes they either should be in school because they're too young to be an OSY, or they could go back to school, or maybe they've recently dropped out, but Lord help you to get re-enroll. Those are both challenges.
This is another another poll that has been pretty one-sided. So with 71% of people responding, 141 of you, or 86%, said that yes, you have struggled to convince an OSY or a student to enroll in the program. So again, it just goes to show how this is something that we have all encountered and had to deal with while out recruiting, while only 23 of you had said no, that it's not something that you'd encountered before.
So I felt like no matter what strategy I used, the student was not interested. His friends kept coming by and teasing him about being a baby or trying to ask me for my number so they could practice English. The OSY said, "Oh, maybe later. I'm not a very good student." And I just couldn't seem to figure out a way to get him to sign up. So this has happened to me more than once, where sometimes you even have other people at the camp who are really interested in services, or at least you personally, but you can't get the OSY to budge, right? So we're going to talk about some tactics that you can use to try to remedy this. So during recruitment, of course, you can always try to ignore the other less helpful people at the camp. Maybe people who are just kind of walking by and giving you some unsolicited compliments or whatever. See if you can go somewhere a bit more private, like maybe down the hall on the porch, but like not the bedroom with a closed door or in an enclosed vehicle when I say more private, but maybe not like right in the middle of the kitchen where you're kind of on display and everybody's like watching them and you come in, right? Try to get one of those older or more respected coworkers or roommates of the OSY to explain why it's a good idea. That's like one of my absolute favorite tactics, especially when working with OSY, is to find those older guys who are really interested in the services and be like, hey, you know, like everybody can participate in the class, you know, if you'll sign up, then everybody can have the class and we can all learn together. And or they might even, if they do really respect that older person, they might be like, no, yeah, when I was your age, I also thought I didn't need English, but you know, actually you're really going to need it more than you think. And I feel like there's some other points on the other slide we'll probably cover. And right, just to remind them during the recruitment that this is an opportunity, right? Especially, I mean, I don't know how your different states do your services, but they can always sign up now and decide later what services they want to take advantage of. You know, maybe they're even in an area, because sometimes I'll always why they're like, I can't really commit to like a weekly, you know, class or whatever. And I'm like, oh, don't worry, you will not be getting a weekly class because it's just me and I don't have time to come back out here. It's more like a self-paced thing, you know, whatever. Or maybe if you're peddling English services, if they already speak English, you can try to kind of think of some other like resources or areas of interest could be for them, right? So it's just an opportunity and they can decide later what services. They don't have to pay anything. It's not an obligation. So you might want to show them some of those self-guided resources, like some you can find on the IDRC or ISOC website. But also just realize you might just have to leave without the COE if it's getting hostile, if you can tell that they're like really embarrassed and getting kind of mad and they're going to like maybe avoid you the next time and it's actually hurting your ability to recruit in the future at that camp. It can be hard to kind of tell sometimes, like, should I push a little harder or should I just leave and leave well enough alone? So you might have to do that. You might also have to bring something to share. that they would value. I know we've gotten from the IDRC in the past packets they really like that have like a bandana, resource list, water bottle, work gloves. Oh my gosh, if we show up with work gloves, it's like, who doesn't want to sign up? You got 40-year-olds being like, yeah, I'm 20. And you're like, no, you're not. So definitely, if you can think of good resources too, that might be a bit more practical and not as much kind of academic feeling. Sometimes you can get the OSY with that. And I think you said something in, oh, good. Jessica, you're saying thing, and this public charge rule change. Some families are not aware of that. About the public charge thing. Yeah. No, we don't fall into that, but that can be difficult. So after the recruitment, you might want to even practice with some coworkers, different ways to sign up an OSY. If you're like, hey, I really struck out bad at this camp the other night, or even non-OSY, there's students or families like we're talking about, they're afraid that it's going to negatively impact them. That's not true, right? Whatever, you can definitely get some information from them. You might want to revisit what services your team has. Is there anything you're missing, popular items or services that other programs have, like OSY Welcome Kit, self-guided English lessons, work gloves, etc., like I was already talking about, that might help you. You might even want to ask other states what they do, and then follow back up in a week or two, especially if you do have other students or other families at that camp. So then maybe they're like, oh, like nobody came and showed up for them. Actually, their kids got to go on a field trip, or like, oh, you actually came back with a food box, or like, oh yeah, so-and-so's work gloves seem to really be holding up. I kind of wish I had signed up the first time, right? And then you're not putting, maybe if they're kind of embarrassed and they don't want to reach back out to you, because some people aren't that forward, you can come back by and be like, hey, I was back in the area bringing, whatever this great service is, while I'm here, do you want me to sign you up this time? And they might be like, yeah, okay, now's okay. But they might not have the, gumption maybe to call you and say like, I changed my mind, will you sign me up now? So that's always, we give it a couple weeks so that they can so they don't feel like you're harassing them.
And just to bring up, the point that Virginia had made in the chat when she mentioned they're seeing more and more even families that are being a little bit worried about signing up. Always when we're interviewing families, I think it's something that's becoming more common, especially over the last couple of years, where families are hesitant or nervous about signing up for the program because they feel like their information might get turned over. We might even see a lot of students or families that are moving into the States from outside of the country who are nervous about enrolling in school. I've had families tell me that they don't want their kids to go to the school because they're afraid if their kids start going to school, they might have issues with their legal status. And so one of the things that we should always stress with families, especially during that initial interview, is the issue of confidentiality, that all of their information is confidential, and that we're only taking their information, to help enroll them in the program, to get them the services that they need, to hopefully build up for the future and success of the students and the children. And so, it might take time to build up that trust and relationship with the families, but, if you keep working at it, you'll be able to get there. All right, so now we have one last scenario for you all here. And so, never have I ever felt burnt out from the job. So I know we've been going for about an hour, so this is our last one, and we'll get through this real quickly for you all. As everybody's answering the poll, I know Jessica had also mentioned in chat about working with labor contractors and working with the labor contractors, especially to help you sign up OSY. And so if you all don't know, Jessica posted the link in the chat to help find those labor contractors in your area. The Department of Labor keeps a list of all foreign labor contractors that you can check that includes addresses and phone numbers as well, so you can contact them. So if you want to check that out, follow the link that Jessica posted to find those contractors in your area. All right, we'll give the poll a few more seconds to allow for everybody to answer. All right, with 70% of the poll, with 70% responding, 113 of you all had said that yes, you have felt burnt out from the job, while 42 of you had said no. And again, I think 73% is quite high, and I think it goes to show It's something that isn't talked about very much, but it can be really easy with our job, with how much we deal with. We saw earlier the numbers, 90% of you said that families had shared trauma with you all, then we can start to feel that compassion fatigue and quickly start to feel burnout. I know, especially, during the winter months, there's been times that I've found where I struggle to find eligible students, struggle to complete COEs. And in those times, you end up working really long days, pushing yourself, trying to complete any COE you can, or to find any new students that you can. And at those times, I was worried that I would get in trouble for not completing enough COEs. And so I ended up pushing myself too hard, which can even end up with you feeling drained, both emotionally and physically. And so I know, a couple people in chat, said, oh, that you all love your jobs and that you've never felt that. And if that's the case, bless you all. You all are the perfect recruiters out there then. Because I think, as our poll shows, the reality is burnout and compassion fatigue are common. If you look at the types of professions that see the most burnout and compassion fatigue, you have social workers and teachers. Those are the two professions in the country that most feel burnout from their jobs. And really, being a recruiter is a combination of being a teacher and a social worker. So, it can easy to see how we can feel it, But, research shows that those who oftentimes experience burnout often fail to realize that that's what's causing them stress. So many times you might be feeling it and might not even know it. Burnout can often lead to serious physical side effects if not taken care of, such as excessive fatigue, vulnerability to other illnesses as your immune system is weakened, depression, and even heart issues due to stress. Some signs of burnout or compassion fatigue include, physical exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, reduced ability to feel sympathy or empathy for families that you're working with, maybe increased anger or irritability. Maybe you find yourself, things getting on your nerves that didn't before. I know a lot of people in here are mentioning in the chat, that the pandemic definitely hasn't helped, and that's very, very true. You might find yourself trying to self-medicate in many different ways. Maybe you're finding yourself not looking forward to work, or especially working with certain clients or certain students. Maybe you're not getting as much enjoyment out of your job as well. And maybe it's even just changing your viewpoint on the world. I've known some recruiters that have told me that, because of their burnout, it's even started to change, how they viewed music that they like, how they viewed the movies that they like. It can really affect the way that we think. So remember, it's important to remember that for all of us as MEP staff and recruiters, that we really need to regularly take care of ourselves and do everything that we can to make sure that we are promoting self-care. It's important to establish boundaries within the workplace. A lot of times, us as recruiters, we care so much. We want to do everything for our families, but we also have to realize that we are not, we are not Superman. We can't save and take care of everything. We have to be able to build those boundaries. It's best, in order to find and know those resources in your area that you can refer families to, so that you can establish those boundaries, so you're not having to take care of every little issue yourself. If you are starting to feel burnout, number one, don't ignore the problem, recognize it, confront it, accept it. Again, it's a common thing, so don't beat yourself up over it. Especially don't go to other staff and complain or unload your stress, because that can only add to the burnout of others. And don't neglect your needs, interests, or desires. If you have your own needs, your own things that you have to take care of, it's important that you take care of those so you can be at your best to make sure that you're being able to help everybody. You got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, that you're getting sufficient rest, trying to sleep as much as you can. Try to get your 8 hours in if possible. I know many of us have children as well, so you might not be able to. Make sure you're eating healthy whenever possible, especially while out in the field. We know how hard that can be, so pack your own lunch. Try to get at least 30 minutes of aerobic exercise in. maybe on a bicycle or go out for a walk or a jog, because that can really help to improve your mental health. And make sure that you replace any, critical talk that you might have. Instead of talking badly about yourself, replace it with self-affirming language. I know Emily mentioned earlier, always practice meditation, practice yoga, do what you need to do to help get yourself both emotionally, spiritually, and physically centered so that you can be yourself. And then lastly, as we close out, the one thing I wanted to mention again is just remember that the work that you all are all doing as recruiters is so valuable. Even during those slow times when you might not be finding as much COEs, you're out there gathering, collecting information, and we all have such great hearts. And we know that all of us have these jobs with the best intentions. So many of you wrote in chat how much you care for your families, and that's something to be celebrated. Recognize the value of your efforts and what you're doing, and use that to help find your motivation. Don't forget, we might not always get the validation we need from the outside, but remember your own worth, how great you are, and the great work that you're doing. Keep celebrating yourself and use that to stay motivated. All right. Well, I know we've gone over our hour mark, and I appreciate everybody that was able to stick around. Jessica posted a link to our survey review form in chat. This webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to the IDRC website and YouTube page later on today. But if you wouldn't mind, go ahead and complete that survey review form in chat. I know some people have to leave. Go ahead and feel free to do so. You can follow the link as well, or you can use the QR code on the screen. Just scan it with your phone and open up the link, and that'll take you straight there. We also want to close out. I want to mention coming up, IDRC is going to be having our Summer Recruitment Institute from May 23rd through the 27th. And we would love for everybody to sign up for that. We have over 400 participants. I posted the link in chat for you to sign up. It's our free summer recruitment conference that's going to be given out. And so it's going to be all virtual so that everybody can attend. And so I would love if everybody could go through, sign up, register for that, and we would love to see you there. All right. Thank you all so much. Emily, you have any closing words?
Thank you all so much for coming and for the work you do and sharing your experiences with us.
Yep. Thank you. I hope you all have a great day.